I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. What do we always say that MAGA stands for? Make attorneys. Get attorneys. Well, the lawyers of the loser MAGA candidates in Arizona, Kari Lake, who's the loser candidate for Arizona governor, and Mark Finchem, the loser MAGA candidate for Secretary of State, both MAGA extremists, both election deniers. Well, on December 1st, both of their attorneys were sanctioned by federal judge Tuchi in the Arizona federal court for filing frivolous lawsuits attacking the integrity of Arizona's midterm election procedures and processes. And so this lawsuit at issue that they were sanctioned for on December 1st was actually brought a little bit before the summer. So in early May, late April, the lawsuit was filed by these MAGA extremist candidates with the goal, as the court found, to really just cast doubt about the election system. And in this lawsuit that was filed by, on behalf of Kari Lake and Mark Finchem, they basically just misrepresented like knowingly the entire way that elections are conducted in Arizona. Just false paragraph after false paragraph, demanding that the judge issue orders doing things that already existed in Arizona or which would never should take place in an election process. So what the court basically said is that, like, you did no research on your lawsuit. You attack things like claiming that Arizona should use paper ballots when, as the federal court says in its ruling, like, Arizona uses paper ballots. And so you're telling voters and you're telling the community out there that Arizona needs to do things that it is already doing, and you're asking me, the judge, to order it. There's a number of other examples like that that I will go through with you, but here's a particularly scathing part of the order where the court, citing all of these other courts that have sanctioned MAGA lawyers or have dismissed these frivolous cases brought by MAGA extremists, and the court says the following: this court shares the concerns expressed by other federal courts about the misuse of the judicial system to baselessly cast doubt on the electoral process in a manner that is conspicuously consistent with plaintiff's political ends. Here it's Kari Lake and Mark Finchem, but substitute whoever the MAGA candidate is. And then they cite a bunch of these other cases where judges have ruled similarly. So they cite, for example, the O'Rourke versus Dominion voting system case from 2021. And the quote is, while plaintiff's counsel insists that the lawsuit was not intended to challenge the election or reverse the results, the effect of the allegation and relief sought would be to sow doubt over the legitimacy of the subsequent presidency and the mechanism of American democracy, the actual system of voting in numerous states. And then they cite other cases standing for the proposition like, this case was never about fraud. This case is about undermining the people's faith in our democracy and debasing the judicial process to do so. And another case they cite where a judge said, the rule of law is undermined by efforts to advance political narratives through lawsuits without factual basis or any cognizable legal theory. Does that last quote sound familiar? Because that was actually one of the cases that we discussed here on the MeidasTouch Network in the Southern District of Florida, where Judge Middlebrooks, the federal judge, sanctioned Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, in the first sanction motion for approximately $50,000. And that line came from the concluding paragraph of Judge Middlebrooks' ruling. And now Alina Habba Trump's lawyer, remember, make attorneys, get attorneys, is facing approximately $1 million in other sanctions motions brought by Hillary Clinton and others for a frivolous racketeering lawsuit that was filed against Hillary Clinton and others by Donald Trump with Alina Habba as the lawyer. And so the sanctions motion at issue that this judge, Tuchi, granted, falls under two statutes. It falls under Federal Rule of Procedure, Rule 11, and it also falls under a statute that is purely for sanctioning attorneys and for attorneys' fees. And so let me give you the analysis here. First for Rule 11, and then for the statute 28 U.S.C. Section 1927 that deals with sanctions for attorney misconduct. And Rule 11 states the following, and Rule 11b provides in relevant part, by presenting to the court a pleading, written motion, or other paper, whether by signing, filing, submitting, or later advocating it, an attorney or unrepresented party certifies that to the best of the person's knowledge, information, and belief, formed after an inquiry reasonable under the circumstances, and is not being presented for any improper purpose, such as to harass, cause unnecessary delay, or needlessly increase the cost of litigation. 2, the claims, defenses, and other legal contentions are warranted by existing law or by non-frivolous argument for extending, modifying, or reversing existing law, for establishing new law. And 3, the factual contentions have evidentiary support, or if specifically so identified, will likely have evidentiary support after a reasonable opportunity for further investigation or discovery. So that's Rule 11, and the sanctions are against a lawyer, or it could be against a party, for engaging in the filing of a frivolous lawsuit where their name is signed to the pleadings, where they don't comply with their ethical obligations stated in the statute. Then 28 U.S.C. Section 1927 provides, quote, any attorney who so multiplies the proceedings in any case unreasonably and vexatiously may be required by the court to satisfy personally the excess costs, expenses, and attorney's fees reasonably occurred because of such conduct. In other words, the statute authorizes the imposition of sanctions against any lawyer who wrongfully proliferates litigation proceedings once a case has commenced. And so under both Rule 11, Federal Rule of Civil Procedure, Rule 11, and under 28 U.S.C. Section 1927, here, Federal Judge Tuchi granted sanctions. And what Federal Judge Tuchi said is, you know what? I probably could sanction Kari Lake and Mark Fincham directly, but here I'm just going to sanction their lawyers because their lawyers know better. And you may be saying, well, why would they sanction just the lawyers? Shouldn't they also sanction Kari Lake and Mark Fincham directly? Yes. However, what the judge said is, look, I could arguably do that, but I think what the judge is getting at here, though, is that those individuals like Kari Lake and Mark Fincham are just like complete clowns, and they're going to use the money that they've raised and donor money to pay off their sanctions anyway. It doesn't say this in the order, but this is what I believe is the subtext here. But with the message that Judge Tuchi is trying to send here is to the lawyers, MAGA lawyers, make attorneys, get attorneys, that you lawyers are going to have to pay these sanctions. And it is unethical, and lawyers can be literally disbarred. They can't have the client basically fund their sanctions. They're going to have to certify that they paid these sanctions themselves. And so this is going to really hit the lawyers and send a message to other lawyers who are representing MAGA extremists not to do so because they're going to be sanctioned. And look, Kari Lake and Mark Fincham are going to face accountability in other forums as well. And so it's not like they're just completely off the hook. But for purposes of this ruling, the court's basically saying we are going to sanction the lawyers. And so this lawsuit, though, was filed against the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, and it was also filed against Katie Hobbs, now the governor-elect of Arizona. But it was filed back, as I said, like in May, late April or May of 2022. And that's really where a lot of the efforts really kind of picked up by these MAGA extremists to try to undermine the election results. Now, there's a bunch of other conduct obviously taking place leading up to the election and then after the election where both Fincham and Kari Lake lost by tens of thousands of votes, and it wasn't even close, not even within a recount margin. But they started filing lawsuits to undermine the integrity of the elections then. So this motion for sanctions was brought by the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors and Katie Hobbs, and it was brought after the case was dismissed. So by August of 2022, this lawsuit had actually already been dismissed. And so all that they were waiting for was this motion for sanctions that was filed. And now after the election, just with the timing of how long it takes for courts to make a ruling, the court grants this motion for sanctions against the lawyer of Katie Hobbs and Mark Fincham. And the analysis that the court goes is the court does a painstaking analysis of the various allegations in the complaint. For example, the court looks at allegations regarding the use of paper ballots. And it goes, the Maricopa County defendants argue that plaintiffs made false allegations and representation that Arizona voters do not vote by hand on paper ballots. And in short, it cannot be disputed that Arizona already requires and uses paper ballots. Allegations to the contrary are simply false. And then the order goes on to say, look, these are all these instances where Kari Lake and Mark Fincham are alleging that paper ballots are not used. And even if they're not saying that directly, they're asking that we compel the use of paper ballots. But why would we do that? It already exists. And so it's just being done to sow doubt in voters and try to harm people's confidence in the election process. And another area is frivolous allegations regarding the testing of Arizona's election equipment. And one of the things that Kari Lake and Mark Fincham alleged is that there was not testing at the appropriate levels, and there was the appropriate levels of testing. So they say this without any evidence at all. Then one of the other false allegations that were in the Kari Lake and Mark Fincham complaint are allegations regarding the lack of vote verifying audits. And so here's just an example of what's in the court order. It says, the Maricopa County defendants argue that plaintiff's complaint falsely alleged that Arizona's tabulation results are not subject to vote verifying audits. Plaintiffs respond that defendants mischaracterized their complaint. They argue that the complaint does not allege that Arizona does not conduct audits. It contests the sufficiency of the audits is at issue. But here, there is sufficient audits, and the court's like, what are you talking about, Kari Lake? And then they go into these bizarre allegations regarding the cyber ninjas hand count of Maricopa County, and then allegations regarding internet connectivity of Maricopa County's election systems and unsupported claims based on speculation and conjecture. Then the court just says, look, almost all of the allegations here were frivolously asserted. There was a failure to conduct a reasonable pre-filing inquiry. These people should have known better. But what the court says is that, well, they're represented by lawyers and they're putting more of the blame on the lawyers. And they're not saying that the candidates are without fault in what they did. They're just saying we're sending a message to the lawyers. Like, the lawyers are the ones who should be sanctioned here and deterred from representing people in these frivolous cases. So what happens next? How much money will Kari Lake and Mark Fincham's lawyers be sanctioned? Well, within 14 days from the entry of this order, the Maricopa County defendants will file supplemental memorandum setting forth the attorney's fees they have reasonably incurred in this case from the time of the filing of plaintiff's first amended complaint to the filing of this order along with supporting documentation and in conformance with the local rules. And then no later than 14 days thereafter, plaintiffs shall file any response as to the reasonableness of the request. So I think we can expect serious sanctions here, definitely I think in the six figures, and we will report to you as soon as we hear the amount of attorney's fees. And look, these lawyers are going to get hit really hard with these sanctions. Same thing with Alina Habba. I expect coming soon, and we'll be reporting about this soon as well. You know, as I said, Alina Habba's already been sanctioned $50,000 in the first sanctions motion. That's in the Southern District of Florida for the frivolous racketeering complaint she brought back in March of 2022. That was dismissed by Judge Middlebrooks there. Then there are those 9 other sanctions motions that are coming for about $1 million, a little more than $1 million. And I think Judge Middlebrooks is going to rule that more sanctions are merited. I don't think Judge Middlebrooks is going to grant the full $1 million, but I expect a mid six figures. I think maybe somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000 in sanctions is my prediction. I think it may be more, but that's kind of where I think the judge will ultimately net out. I think it should be more, but that's where I think the judge will find out. But we will see. I'll keep you posted. Make sure you hit the subscribe button right now. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers here at the MeidasTouch Network. We really appreciate your support. And if you can, consider becoming a patron of the MeidasTouch Network. We're not funded by any outside investors, but if you go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch, you could become a member of one of the exclusive membership packages at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. There's lots of great content you can only get on patreon.com/MeidasTouch, but most importantly, help grow this independent media platform. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Until next time.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy, and look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs. It wasn't rigged, you're just a loser. At store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.